Hey everybody, welcome to session 147 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. We are talking today about teaching behavior analysis, and I have some excellent guests to chat about this topic with because I just wrote a new textbook, An Introduction to Behavior Analysis. So in this episode, I get an opportunity to sit down with Drs. Florence DiGennaro-Reed, Dr. Derek Reed, and Dr. Gregory Madden. And while we did talk quite a bit about their new book, we framed the discussion around the process of teaching itself. So I think whether or not you're in the role of teaching behavior analysis, you'll get a lot out of this conversation. So before we get to the interview itself, let me do some brief introductions here. Dr. Florence DiGennaro-Reed is an associate professor in and chairperson of the Department of Applied Behavioral Science at the University of Kansas, where she directs the Performance Management Laboratory and Performance Management Center. Her research examines effective and efficient staff training and performance improvement practices. Dr. Derek Reed is a familiar voice to the podcast, having been in session 7 and I think 103 or 113. I'll have the specific link in the show notes, but for those of you who are hearing his voice for the first time, he is an associate professor in the Department of Applied Behavioral Science, again at the University of Kansas, where he directs the Applied Behavioral Economics Laboratory. And just as an aside, I recommend going back and checking out those other episodes that we've done on behavioral economics and other related topics. And then we have Dr. Greg Madden. He teaches and conducts research at Utah State University. Here's an excerpt from his bio in his own words. He writes, I am a professor in the Department of Psychology. I teach Psychology 1400 and 1410, which is the introductory course in behavioral processes. Topics range from free will to interventions designed to treat depression and drug dependence. I also teach upper division courses on applying behavior change technology to workplace settings. So, and just as an aside, I'm really thrilled, obviously, to speak to all three of these guests, but Dr. Madden's work in particular was noteworthy. As I remember reading a lot of his papers as an undergraduate and graduate student, so it's really fun to have a chance to chat with him on the podcast here. All right. Well, it turns out that they've been working on this book for roughly 6 years, and we talked about why they thought a new ABA text was necessary, what makes this book stand apart from the other really good ones that are out there, and how they attacked the massive challenge that is the writing process itself. Along the way, we ended up getting into what makes for good university instruction, the need, perceived or otherwise, to sell behavior analysis, and lots of other interesting nuggets and tips for those who have the important task of teaching the next generation of behavior analysis students. And as I referenced earlier, I think there are a lot of meta lessons embedded in this conversation. So again, I think this is relevant to folks whether or not you're in a teaching role. So this podcast is brought to you with generous support from the Tizard Center at the University of Kent. If you want to study ABA and positive behavioral supports at a top-notch setting in Europe, then look no further than the Tizard Center at the University of Kent. Since 1986, they've been training professionals to support individuals with disabilities. Their primary focus has always been promoting values-based and ethical approaches to supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. If you'd like to learn more about ABA and PBS training on an international stage, check out tizard.org. That's tizard.org. We're also brought to you by the Gateway Learning Group and their Autism Leadership Academy. Designed for new regional directors, the Autism Leadership Academy develops motivated BCBAs into successful leaders in the autism field. If you're interested in running your own regional center and want to learn the skills to do so successfully, check out gatewaylg.com/BOP. Again, that's gatewaylg.com/BOP. And note, there are immediate openings available in Texas, and BCBAs from across the U.S. are encouraged to apply. And then finally, we are brought to you by Behavior University. And, you know, you've been hearing about Behavior University for a long time on the podcast, and their mission is to provide university quality professional development for the busy behavior analyst. Learn more about their CEU offerings, including their brand new 8-hour supervision course, as well as RPT courses and more, over at behavioruniversity.com/observations. And there's some podcast-specific discounts there. And then last but not least, if you are interested in getting an ad-free version of this podcast, along with many other cool benefits, head over to patreon.com/behavioral observations. That's patreon.com/behavioral observations. As always, extensive show notes, links, and all sorts of fun stuff are over at behavioralobservations.com. And I think that does it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, let's get to this conversation with Derek, Flo, and Greg.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
All right, I'm joined by Drs. Florence DiGennaro-Reed, Derek Reed, and Gregory Madden. Folks, thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk a lot about teaching behavior analysis, and in the process, talk about your forthcoming book, An Introduction to Behavior Analysis. So welcome again. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so again, it's, you guys have the book coming out, An Introduction to Behavior Analysis. We're going to get into that, certainly. And I want to talk, I've got all sorts of questions about that in terms of why you wrote it and things along those lines. But, I want to kind of wrap this around the general topic of teaching behavior analysis. A lot of us, kind of everyday BCBAs. And what I mean by that is kind of not practicing folks, non-tenure track faculty and things like that are being called upon to teach at an adjunct level. I've been asked to teach classes a few times over the last several years. I've always turned it down because I always feel like, I'm not ready for it, or it's not something, either, for various and sundry reasons that I won't get into right now, but a lot of people are. And so I know you guys have been at this teaching game for quite some time. So I figured, again, we'll start from there. Before we get into that, however, I'd like to, Derek, you're a familiar name to the podcast. I haven't been on several times, but Greg and Flo, I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to kind of introduce yourselves to the audience. And then from there, we all know who we are, and we can get going from there. So Greg, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I'm Greg Madden, and I'm a professor in the behavior analysis program within the Department of Psychology at Utah State University. And my specialty area of study is impulsive decision-making. The thing that drives my passion for research is finding ways to reduce impulsivity in the decisions that, at this point, that rats make, but in the future, hopefully, that humans make as well. It has great implications for understanding substance use disorders and all kinds of maladaptive behaviors that we fall prey to. I was also the editor-in-chief of the journal, The Experimental Analysis of Behavior, a few years back. And I served as the editor-in-chief of the APA Handbook of Behavior Analysis, which was released by the American Psychological Association in 2013.
Great. So I'm sure you had some reactions to Matt Johnson's recent paper about the construct of impulsivity. We won't get into that right now. Maybe that's a conversation for a follow-up episode.
Sure. That conversation.
So, all right, Flo, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. I am an associate professor at the University of Kansas. We are in the Department of Applied Behavioral Science. And I came here about 10 years ago. I'm saying we because Derek and I are sort of go together. So we came here 10 years ago, and my background is in a variety of areas. I've consulted with public schools, private schools, home programs, residential programs, done parent training and staff training. And since I came here, I've really focused my efforts on helping staff provide better services to individuals with disabilities, both children and autism. That's my passion, really, is about us using the limited resources that we have to deliver the highest quality of services that are possible. So my research focuses on performance management, which is a subfield of organizational behavior management. I also have a laboratory where we tinker with things related to performance management. Before we know whether they're effective in the applied world, I think it's important that we kind of better understand them. But all of my research and work is focused on helping to improve things in real world settings. Even if it's in the laboratory, it's got an eye toward that. That's the goal. I've been an associate editor for the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis in Practice, Journal of Behavioral Education, and sat on the editorial boards for other journals as well.
Excellent. And Derek, I don't want to leave you out. I know, again, you've had an opportunity to kind of delve into your background in the podcast on at least 2 occasions previously. I'll link those episodes in the show notes. But for those who may be living under a rock and didn't catch the session 17 in which you
Sure.
debuted on the podcast, tell us a little bit about yourself real quick.
Sure. Derek Reed. I'm at the University of Kansas, like Flo said. I'm a professor in applied.
You're the plus one.
I'm the plus one. That's right. I am professor of applied behavioral science. I direct an applied behavioral economics lab. And kind of what we're interested in doing is taking concepts from behavioral economics, decision-making, reinforcer, quality and effectiveness, and then applying that to various issues of societal concern. So we're more like problem analysts. We find interesting problems and try to find ways to apply what we know to help fix them. So we're currently involved with a whole bunch of research on COVID, which I've talked to you a little bit about before. We've previously done research on like indoor tanning. I'm affiliated with the Coughlin-Logan Center for Addiction Research and Treatment. So I do research on things like cannabis use, alcohol use, focusing on undergraduate populations. So really just have a lot of fun trying to tackle some big world problems with the science that we all know and love.
Awesome. All right. So, Greg, I want to start off with you. You've been at the teaching of behavior analytic concepts game for, I'm going to guess, a lot longer than our other colleagues here on this call. And when I have someone who's been doing this sort of thing for a while on the podcast, I always love to get a historical context, if you will. And so what I'd love to do is get your perspective perhaps on the nature of teaching behavior analysis, what it was like when you first started doing it, and what might be some of the changes that you've observed over the years, to the extent that there have been some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll give you a 2-part answer to the question, and I think it reflects the honesty of my situation and the honesty of what's going on in the field. And for me in particular, most of my faculty career has been in departments of psychology. And so the course that I teach is this Introduction to Behavior Analysis course. And the students who were in there, they really haven't changed much over the last 25 years that I've taught that course. So, they tend to be, students like a lot of us, like a lot of everybody, really. I mean, they're interested in behavior, or they become interested in behavior over the course of the semester. They're interested in themselves. They're interested in the people that they know. They're interested in making the world a better place. They're aware of the existential challenges of our time, and they're interested in doing something to contribute positively to changing that situation. So, in part, we wrote this book for that audience, the people who are interested in those questions, those that want to do, big things with a science that is about big things. So in the book, we try to communicate that this is a science that has done big things already. It's a science that continues to evolve and grow. And we try to point to the growth areas within the field of behavior analysis, and maybe even to areas where we haven't grown into yet, but we see great potential for our science in those areas. So that's part of the audience. And to go back to the answer to your question, so in part, that group hasn't really changed. But in part, that is the future of our science, is those young people who are interested in the questions that a behavior analyst would be interested in. And we just need to bring behavior analysis to that audience who, frankly, has never heard of behavior analysis before. When those words come out of my mouth, it's literally the first time they've ever heard them before, because they're psychology majors. And so they have very not contemporary, but very traditional views of what psychology is.
You probably already know that Behavior University creates engaging ABA content for new and experienced professionals. Whether it's RBT training or webinars for BACB CEUs, Behavior University has you covered. New for fall 2020, Behavior University is launching an interactive BACB Supervisor training, an innovative approach to supervision training with interactive video to practice decision-making and tools to create a personalized portfolio to take with you when you're done. The course is designed to guide new supervisors through applying the important skills required for effective supervision to their own unique experiences. Behavior University also offers 2 tiers of RBT training. Choose the essentials for the 40-hour course or the premium to add a full kit of study materials and a full-length practice exam. In addition to these features, supervisors can now purchase access to these RBT courses so they can monitor any RBT training for course progress and quiz performance. Supervisors will also receive tools and content to support training of new staff. Users rave about Behavior University RBT training, calling it the clearest instruction, the course that made it stick, amongst other comments. BCBAs say that their staff clearly get it after taking their course. Behavior University is the brainchild of Drs. Jessica Love and Shannon Crozier, 2 BCBADs with a passion for applied behavior analysis and evidence-based practices. So to check out what they've built and to get podcast-specific discounts, head on over to behavioruniversity.com/observations.
Now, at the same time, the second part of the answer is that, we're aware of changes that are happening within the teaching of behavior analysis. So a lot of the students who are coming into these classrooms, they know what behavior analysis is, and they have a pretty good idea of exactly what they would like to get out of the course. And so we wrote the book to that audience as well. So we provide a very systematic coverage of the core principles and procedures for our field. But also, I think that same message of you are the future of the field. You are the next the readers of this book. You are the next generation of behavior analysts. Let's talk seriously about the potential of the field and the growth areas within the field. That's a message that I think resonates well with that audience as well. And then you alluded, here's the third part of my 2-part answer, is that you alluded to in the asking of the question is that there's a lot of people who are challenged to teach this course, and that they might not feel entirely prepared to teach the course. And so, we wrote the book in a way that really it's for the introductory student, and it's written in a way that they'll be able to understand. I can't tell you the number of times that we provided feedback to each other in the writing of this book that the undergraduate student's not going to understand this the way that we've written it so far. And we just rewrote it. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times we rewrote this book. It took 6 years, but it was because of all the rewriting that went into it to make sure that that audience could understand what it was that we were saying. And then to help out the professors and the new faculty and the adjuncts who are going to teach this course, we prepared PowerPoint lectures to go with every chapter in the book. And these are, things that you can add to and subtract from. And then there's also a test bank that comes with about 40 questions that goes with each of the chapters as well. Anybody add anything to that, since I live in a silo of psychology?
Before you guys jump in, and I definitely do want you guys to jump in on this, there's a couple of things I'd like to follow up that might be specific to you, Greg. So you're teaching in the Department of Psychology. And as we've seen over the year, I mean, that was my first encounter with behavior analysis, and that was before behavior analysis was its kind of own distinct discipline. And I was just an undergraduate psych major, I actually was more interested in cognitive psychology and personality psychology and all sorts of things like that. And I took my first behavior analysis class, and it was, the light switch moment that many of us have had. And I wonder sometimes if that experience is less frequent these days, where behavior, as you were saying, that people are now coming into a behavior analysis class with some familiarity and frankly with some expectations. But getting back to the general psych audience, if you will, do you feel pressure, if you will, that like you have to, like, this is my shot at making the sale, of behavior analysis, when it's juxtaposed to all these other disciplines within psychology, like I just mentioned, personality, cognitive, social, et cetera. What is going on with you when you have that first class or that first couple of weeks of class? It's like, look, I got to hook these guys, or else they're going to do this other thing that and not to slag anyone else and whatever, but we kind of do what we do because we feel it's effective and it's the right way to conceptualize what's going on in the world and so forth. So, can you talk to me a little bit about that experience in that particular setting of like an intro, undergraduate psych setting?
Yeah, for me, it's just fun. I just love doing it. I've done it for so long. I don't really get nervous about, this is my one shot kind of thing. It's fun to give the lectures and to see the lights come on in the students, to see that same experience that I had and that it sounds like you had as well when you first heard this and you thought, oh my goodness, this is so practical. It's not entirely lost in these mundane theories that seem to go nowhere. And the students, they resonate to it as much today as they have in the past. And it's a blast to see it. And when students come to my office, and I've had quite a few students over the last 10 years come to my office and say, I thought the only real growth area in psychology was neuroscience. And so I thought I was going to be a neuroscientist. And now you're telling me that what I thought was an old, dead, washed up area in psychology is not, that they've done these amazing things and that there is these opportunities for growth to do more. That's pretty cool. And unlike, I don't want to badmouth other areas of scientific study because I have enormous respect for the things that are done within neuroscience. But for people like me who are kind of impatient and want to make a difference in the world and they want to do it now, this stuff is incredibly practical and they can see it and they're attracted to it. And yeah, it's great. I mean, I take enormous pride, and I know that Derek and Flo do as well, when I see students go off to graduate school. And, we've all had students who make real contributions to this field. And there's just no bigger sense of pride that I have about what I've accomplished or given to the field. I mean, my own research, it's the next generation that I care about.
All right, very cool. All right, so Flo and Derek, I want to kind of bring your thoughts into this as well. I know you guys have been teaching for a while yourselves, perhaps not as long as Greg, but certainly have a considerable experience. And have you guys seen any changes in the way in which you go about it, and over the last couple of years?
Sure, I can jump in here. So, unlike Greg, I'm in an applied behavioral science department, and here at KU, we actually have a separate psychology department, and we're not linked formally in any way. Some of us collaborate over with psychology, but we don't hold appointments there. So for our students, most students don't know what applied behavioral science is. And so they might be psychology majors or thinking they might be psychology majors or special education or education. And they take my intro course at applied behavioral science because it fulfills some requirements for the university. And so it definitely is more of a pressure to hook because we have to tell them what applied behavioral science is. They've never heard of us before. And so I do feel a little bit more pressure. I mean, partially there's logistics, the business side of things. We need majors for our department to function. And so we've got to inspire these students to select us. They've never heard of us before. And, what I found over the years, though, is that like current generations are more interested in helping, and they're more interested in like having purpose, more so than necessarily like making money per se. And so I think that's where we've had a lot of success in recent years, is because they can see firsthand that what we offer can change lives and change behavior. And so my course that I teach in our department is that hook. It's the gateway to our major. And like Greg said, it's so awesome every semester to have students who had never heard of us. They had a whole track of what they wanted to do in college and their undergraduate major, and they just completely change gears after they see the examples in our books and they see the examples in lecture. It's pretty life-changing for them. It's really inspiring, and it's really inspiring for me to see that happen. So it's been kind of fascinating to see that kind of evolve over the years in terms of what motivates the students. And I think we're at a time now where there's so many, pressing issues in our society and our culture. And we also have this, awesome technology that it's great for recruiting prospective behavior analysts.
Do you guys see a lot of students switching majors as a result of taking your class? Obviously it's a different situation than the one Greg's in, where it's just, you can stay a psychology major, but focus on a more behavior analytic track. That was my experience at the University of New Hampshire a gazillion years ago. So do you have people kind of like crossing over, or, can you make, just out of, I guess, sheer curiosity, can you maintain a certain major and yet, kind of either minor in or specialize in a behavior analytic, kind of a sub-track or something like that? I'm just kind of curious. I have a daughter going to college in a couple of years too, so this part of me, there's a little selfish interest as well. I mean, not that I'm trying to pressure her into anything, but.
Send her to KU. We have a lot of students who dual major or major and minor in psychology or business or special ed, leadership studies. So it is not uncommon, and they partner well together. Not to get too in the weeds about KU, but our psychology department doesn't have certain areas that are tackled, like IO Psych. So psychology students might be drawn to applied behavioral science after taking Derek's class, but he talks about all the different applications, and they hear about OBM, for example, and so they might be interested in having a dual major or major and minor in what we do and what psychology does. I think the biggest challenge we have, and to build upon what Greg and Derek already shared, is that sometimes students' perceptions of behavior analysis are tainted by experiences or other courses that they've had because of what faculty have said about behavior analysis. Not only that it might be dead, but that it's awful, right? And so we have to challenge that in a way that doesn't now bash the faculty who said that about us. So one of the challenges and also one of the joys is when we are successful at that, and not only see the light bulb turn on, but also challenge some assumptions and thinking.
Are you interested in applied behavior analysis? And would you like to study in Europe, specifically in England? Well, since 1986, the Tizard Center at the University of Kent has been providing higher education courses designed to upskill professionals working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Tizard is one of the leading research centers globally and offers 2 ABAI-verified course sequences in applied behavior analysis and positive behavior support. The Tizard Center has been widely recognized for the quality of its training and research, and it's been at the forefront of deinstitutionalization in the UK, while being one of the first research centers to offer training in ABA in Europe. In recognition of this, In 2013, the Tizard Center was awarded the Queen's Anniversary Prize for the quality of its research. So as a student at the Tizard Center's campus-based program, you'll work closely with experts in the field of ABA and PBS. The University of Kent is situated in the historic city of Canterbury, with London accessed by high-speed train in less than 1 hour and easy links to Europe nearby. The Canterbury campus provides accommodations for postgraduates, a library, a gym, and a supermarket alongside medical and well-being services. The Tizard Center has been welcoming students from all over the world for years, creating a vibrant international community of students interested in behavior analysis. Finally, the Tizard Center's primary focus has always been on promoting values-based and ethical approaches to supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. If you'd like to learn more about the Tizard Center and the unique opportunity to learn about the applications of ABA and PBS on the international stage, please go to tizard.org. That's Tizard.org, or simply Google Tizard Center, University of Kent. To learn more, go to the show notes for this episode or email tizard-info@kent.ac.uk. What are some common myths that students are coming in with, just while you bring that up? I'm curious.
Yeah, we were really intentional in writing the book to build in the misconceptions of behavior analysis, or to challenge some myths or misconceptions about it. For example, in chapter 1, we raised that thinking is behavior. And a lot of students who have taken, for example, a cognitive psych course might think that we don't tackle that at all. That's not something we care about, and we ignore it altogether. So we include that in the book. One of the chapters summarizes objections to using reinforcement. I suspect your listeners will be familiar with some of those. They probably encounter these all the time. Common ones are that reinforcement will decrease intrinsic motivation, or it could foster cheating. So we thought it was important to include these for a whole host of reasons. Students themselves may object to using reinforcement even without any real experience in behavior analysis. So we thought it was a good idea to challenge that thinking. Students might encounter others who share those objections or ascribe to many of the myths and misconceptions because they took other classes or their parents are in a particular field. And we wanted to educate them about the status of our research. And as Greg mentioned, we want to attract students to our field as the next generation of behavior analysts. So all of us at some point in our careers, and your listeners as well, have had to convince parents that reinforcement isn't bad, or be very thoughtful and careful in our use of consultation skills so that we can convince teachers who don't believe in reinforcement. You know, I had that conversation so many times.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling sometimes. As a new mom myself, relatively new mom myself, I've had to defend my parenting approach, which is behavior analytic. It's grounded in our science, and to sort of defend what we do to others who think it's inappropriate, for example, to use positive reinforcement or a pre-MEC principle. So because we are trying to recruit that next generation, we wanted to arm them with defenses against spurious claims or some of those misconceptions and myths. So throughout the book, we pepper that all throughout the book.
Oh, that sounds like it's worth the price of admission on that alone. So,
if I could just add one tiny point,
sure.
Just to accentuate something that Flo said, is that, and when it is that we provide those arguments, against some of the common misconceptions, we're also scholarly about it, so that it's not just us saying, well, really it's this. I mean, we provide the citations, we review the meta-analyses. I mean, we really did our due diligence on this, and I think what we do in the book is we provide an honest response to this, because some of the things that people are concerned about, there are some pieces of evidence there that they're right about. And so you should know this if you're going to use these techniques, is that under some circumstances, there can be some issues. You need to know what those circumstances are, and you need to know how to avoid those circumstances. And you need to know that it's, vastly overblown. And And so here's your ammunition to go into the argument so that you can have that argument in a very scholarly way.
I would add that I think that's one of my favorite things about the book is our honesty about the status of research in any given area that we're covering, and in challenging readers to potentially do that in the future, if as they become the next generation of behavior analysts. And we don't sugarcoat where some of those myths or misconceptions might have a little bit of validity. We're honest about that, and I like that we do that.
What would be an example of that?
Yeah, so for example, in one of the chapters, we talk about some of the downsides of positive reinforcement. And we indicate that, positive reinforcement can be a force for good, but it's not necessarily a force for good. And so, for example, there was a recent interview with the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, and he was talking about basically how his platform, they didn't really understand positive reinforcement is what it boiled down to, was what he was saying. They didn't understand that if they set these contingencies up, that it might bring out the worst in people, that it might allow others to reinforce really vile behaviors in the Twittersphere. And they just didn't know anything about reinforcement contingencies. And so we talk about that and how having a really good understanding of behavioral contingencies really could have helped them. And again, in one of these recent interviews that I listened to with Jack Dorsey, he said, we really wish we would have had some behavioral scientists on hand, and we're hiring them now so that we can understand how these contingencies work and prepare for the next iterations of what Twitter will look like.
I always find that interesting where you hear like places like Google and Twitter and Facebook and other places are hiring behavior analysts, and it always makes me wonder, where do they find these people? Is it word of, it seems like such a small number of possible jobs relative to obviously the plentiful jobs in other areas in our field. But I guess that's perhaps we could leave that to speculation for the time being. Okay, last break of this podcast. I want to tell you about the All right, one more quick break, and then we're on to the rest of this interview. So this part of the podcast is brought to you by the Gateway Learning Group and their Autism Leadership Academy. It's an exclusive masterclass in leadership that develops motivated BCBAs into successful leaders at Gateway. When you join the Gateway Learning Group team as a regional director, you'll immerse yourself in the Autism Leadership Academy. It's an intensive management training program. Cross-functional leaders at Gateway will share their expertise in leadership, business operations, marketing, and recruitment. Upon graduation from the Autism Leadership Academy, Gateway regional directors will launch ABA therapy services in their own regions. With weekly mentorship from senior regional directors, new regional directors will hire staff, open offices, and launch direct therapy services in their home regions. In collaboration with local school districts and healthcare providers, they'll fill the needs for services in the local community to support individuals with autism and their families. So if you're a BCBA with a passion for learning and a desire to lead, please think about applying to the Autism Leadership Academy. You can learn more about it at gatewaylg.com/BOP. You can also get this information at the show notes for this episode over at behavioralobservations.com. Should also note that they have immediate openings for regional directors in the state of Texas, and behavior analysts from across the country are encouraged to apply. Okay, that's it for commercial break. So let's get back to the conclusion of this podcast. I want to take a second, kind of just get back to the general topic of teaching here, and in your everyday practice in the classroom, what are some behavior analytic concepts that you guys might use on the instruction side of thing? One of the things that it's been a while since I was in grad school, but I remember taking these behavior analytic courses, but it was the traditional lecture format with the giant blue book test, at the middle and end of the course sequence. So the actual practice of instruction was, went back centuries. It wasn't, there wasn't, frequent data collection. There wasn't, competency. It wasn't competency based, et cetera, et cetera. It was old school. I guess I'll, just leave it at that. I won't name any names, but, so in terms of the actual practice of teaching, what are some behavior analytic things that you guys bring to the classroom to really help your students master the material efficiently and effectively?
Good question. Fortunately, as a field, we've got decades of empirical work on what works in learning and what works for instruction, and we can pull from those. I know, as we've moved to some online teaching here at KU, our students have reported across many of our courses that they've really enjoyed the applied behavioral science classes because the instructors kind of know what they're doing. And again, it's because we have this technology. So certain things that we've brought into our classrooms are things like SAFMEDs. So see all fast, 1 minute each day shuffled, which your listeners are aware of. But what we've done is kind of incorporated that into some platforms that students can get on their computers and on their iPads and their phones. So things like Study Blue, they're like online flashcards. And what I do in my course is we take 5 minutes at the start of every lecture and our discussion sections, and we go through the terms for that week, as well as kind of the broader terms from the book thus far. And we practice those together. So we have 250 people when we're in person responding together, choral responding, shouting out the words that go with the definition. And students at first are really confused by that. They think it's a little odd. But towards the end of the class, they really get into it and they report that they learn a lot. So that's one little thing. A major piece of my class borrows from PSI, so Personalized System of Instruction, so the Keller sort of approach. And we've kind of adapted the course to follow that framework. So our book has reading quizzes built into every chapter. So as students are progressing through the chapter, they're kind of tested to make sure that they're understanding the concepts. The answers are at the back of the chapter. So what we've done is we've used technology in our learning management systems. So Blackboard, Canvas, any of those things. We've developed these modules that correspond with the reading. And it's basically PSI. They have to get 100% completion on that to be able to open up the chapter quiz that's worth a lot of points. But they have unlimited opportunities. They can go at their own pace. This is all digital, so they do it on their computer at their own time. And as they progress, they open up the next piece of the course. So as they go through that, an important piece of that is stress upon the written word. So they're not just doing multiple choice questions. They're actually generating the response. They're typing the word. They're learning how to spell because the computer has to have it spelled correctly to be able to assign points, which I think is really important. It's incredible how many students can have difficulty learning how to spell environment. That was a one that always kind of threw me for a loop. That was a tricky one. Then interteaching is another big one that we do. And that's something that, permits students to kind of teach each other. And there's ways that you could structure that. There's many different ways behavior analysts have kind of refined interteaching. But we kind of use the basics of it. We use our lectures as more of an inspirational thing. It's more of a motivational thing about the content, fills in the gaps, but it's not the primary source of their learning. The primary source is through the modules and the reading and interteaching. And so our lectures are more kind of fun TED Talk, at least mine are, in terms of getting them to understand the material in a broader context. And then once they've completed their materials, they can get access to kind of like hints about what interteaching will be for the week. And so interteaching then in Zoom era is a little bit more complicated. So we have breakout rooms and students work with two partners and they kind of synthesize the material for the week. and come up with answers to questions that really don't have a true correct answer, but it forces them to kind of think through. And what we're assessing is their ability to correctly use concepts, correctly talk about concepts, and most importantly, work together. I think interteaching, we use it because it works really well for instruction, but I also think it's an important skill set for future behavior analysts, because behavior analysts, especially those in practice, I mean, we consult, we collaborate, and that's kind of the nature of our game. So you've got to learn how to work together and arrive at correct answers. And so I'll pop into the discussion rooms and check in on them and kind of help prompt them along to their answers. So we've basically taken everything we could find in the various technologies of teaching that we have and have tried to find ways to adapt it in some way. And it's been a really fun challenge to do that.
One thing I'm curious about, just more generally, and I appreciate going into detail about that, Derek, and I'll throw this out to all you guys. What are there consistent things and concepts and principles in behavior analysis that you see students really struggle grasping or struggle mastering? And I was wondering, so if you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe some tips for kind of overcoming those hurdles.
Sure, I can jump in on that one and let other people kind of prompt in as well. Over the years, collectively, we've experienced a lot of these. And so I think one of the advantages to having the opportunity to write our own book is to tackle those. And we've kind of seen those develop. So there's obviously the basic ones, positive versus negative reinforcement. Students have a difficult time with that. And the best we could do with that is to provide flowcharts and kind of use what we've experienced that has been effective in our lectures and in our own teaching and put that into the book. So again, strategic use of those reading quizzes to make sure that we're prompting and fading in terms of their learning of that material throughout the book. But one area that I think the book does a really great job of addressing, and I'm glad you asked this, is the discussion of punishment. This is something that I've experienced several times in a course where students will get really kind of upset when they hear that we're going to teach them how to use punishment, and they're, morally or philosophically opposed to it. And so what the book does, and this is kind of our approach to handling all of these sort of issues, is we meet the students where they're at. Through our years of teaching, we kind of know what our students present with and what their backgrounds are and what the common kind of knee-jerk reactions are to some of these terms. And so for the example of punishment, we show them how punishment is kind of ubiquitous. Whether you like it or not, you use punishment. Whether you like it or not, punishment's happening to you all the time. And so painting that picture to them and letting them realize, like, this isn't a technology that, we're using punishment. Sure, we can do that, but it's just a natural part of the human experience. And so kind of what Greg alluded to earlier with respect to pulling from kind of the broader literature in the area of punishment specifically, we pull from things like anthropology or game theory to show that this isn't a behavior analysis thing. This is just a human condition. It's something that happens, not even just humans, non-humans too. And so we show them how it's not just behavior analysts who use this. Everyone is using punishment. So we use flowcharts for those things to kind of walk through. All punishment is a functional relation. There's a stimulus change that happens in the environment, and then behavior decreases. So I think a real advantage of this book is that it's drawing from the broader literature and using all of the literature to our advantage. So behavior and behavioral social sciences broadly. And we, like Flo said before as well, punishment's one of these areas where we like to think that we've kind of cornered the market in behavior analysis, but we haven't. There's a lot of research that remains to be done, and a lot of behavioral sciences outside of behavior analysis have beat us to it. And we include that because it's important, and it's important for students to see that, yes, neuroscience studies punishment, psychology studies punishment. It's not just behavior analysis. So those are just a couple examples. I don't know if, Greg, you want to pepper in anything else that you've experienced, or Flo?
All right, you covered the punishment angle there pretty soundly, it seems like, Derek. So let's talk a little bit about the. So I want to get into like why you wrote the book. There's no shortage of ABA textbooks out there, and so I want to ask why, and I also want to just kind of delve into the experience of taking on this what has to be a massive project, especially when the main ABA textbook out there is, referred to as the Bible of sorts, so what was the hole in the marketplace, if you will? What problem were you trying to solve with this particular textbook or what were you trying to remedy that was problematic, perhaps in the offerings that are currently out there? And what does what does the book do differently to address those?
Thanks for asking that question. We've had other people ask us that.
I'm sure the publisher did.
Our field is really diverse. You think about the continuum of research, basic to applied. So first, we wanted to assemble a team of authors who reflect that diversity. Greg has expertise in basic research with non-human animals and humans. Derek is more of a translational researcher and has interests in public policy and impacting things, at a big scale. Both have some applied experiences early on in their careers. While I do conduct translational research, my primary interest is in the application of our science. In addition to the types of research we do, our programmatic lines of research also differ. So, we really wanted to make sure that this diversity was reflected in the content that we cover in the book, the research that we cite, and the examples we provide. We are really intentional in how we organize the book. So as an instructor teaching a basic behavior analysis class, so let's say a learning course, for example, that instructor could adopt our book and then emphasize and really highlight the basic research angle. Alternatively, an instructor teaching an applied course could also adopt our book and highlight the applied research and examples we summarize. And then students get exposed to the full continuum of research and behavior analysis and research outside of behavior analysis. So it wasn't really a problem that we were trying to solve per se. We decided to write this book because we saw an opportunity to contribute in a novel way. And we thought that was unique, our approach to writing the book.
Great. And
as for the other part of a question about, setting out to write a book that whether the Bible was already written. And, we didn't set out to write the New Testament. I think what Flo was saying, we're just trying to make a contribution to the field with a great deal of diversity of training and expertise. But that massive task of writing this, I guess on the mundane side, the way we went about it was just to take some steps from, Skinner's writing and just set aside a time period for writing every day. So if you ask my graduate students, they would tell you that outside my office door, there's a sign that says, do not knock on this door from these periods of time because I'm writing. So just really trying to set aside that time and make a habit of writing. And so actually one of the things that's in the book that I don't know that's in any other books, and I don't really know because I didn't go out and read a bunch of other books, is that we do summarize a little bit of the habit formation literature, which I think is a potentially really useful area of research for behavior analysts to know more about and to incorporate into their work. And so, I tried to use some of the techniques in habit formation to help me to get into the habit of writing every single day. And so, for example, I did something called habit stacking, which is where what you do is you take a behavior that you already engage in habitually every day, and you just make that kind of like your discriminative stimulus for the immediate thing that I will always do at the end of this behavior, which occurs habitually every single day, is I will write. I will sit down and I will write. And so for me, at my office before COVID, my dog and I walked to work every day, and his job is to be underneath my desk and keep me company and lick my lunch plates clean, stuff like that. But so one of the habits that I had every day was that I would fill up his water bowl every day. And as soon as I would come back and set his water bowl down, it just became habitual to just sit down, turn off email, remove distractions, and write. And that was, kind of a mundane thing that I did, but it is how you go about a big project like this. I think the other answer that's a little less mundane, sort of the big picture answer to, how do you go about a big project like this, is that we didn't rush it. It did take the better part of 6 years to write this book, but that's just how long it took. And as I mentioned before, there was a lot of writing and rewriting and provision of feedback and rewriting to really put a product out there that would really resonate with the reader. And I think we didn't, and Flo mentioned this before, we didn't take shortcuts. One approach to writing a book like this would just be to pull all the existing books off the shelf and then take the best parts and call it your own. But we didn't do that. We have a diverse group of authors in this in terms of our experiences and our training. And we really wanted that to be reflected in the book. And so we left those books on the shelf and went out and did our due diligence and did the research ourselves. And we didn't take anybody's word for it. It's like, we've all used other books in teaching the course over the years. And so everything that was in those books that we remembered and had taught in some cases for years, we're like, well, this is going to be our book, so we have to get it right. And so we're going to go and we're going to look at those studies and we're going to make sure that this is correct. And sometimes it wasn't correct. And so we corrected it. And so we did our best to really provide an honest coverage of the literature that's in this book.
If I'm understanding correctly, I think in our various correspondence leading up to this interview, it seemed like you guys had been using these materials in kind of early iterations, or it sounds like almost like a how stand-up comics will do segments of their show, if you will, their larger set, and kind of workshop it in front of crowds and kind of get it just right and whatnot. Can you talk about that process and perhaps maybe some of the reactions that your students have had as you're exposing them to these kind of beta versions of the book, and just more broadly? Obviously, you could speak to the details of the book, but I'm also interested in just maybe some general principles here that listeners can extract in terms of, how do you get something right? How do you refine something? Because most of the listeners here aren't going to be writing an ABA textbook, and I think there might be some general principles involved here that would be helpful in a broader sense.
Sure. There are three main areas I think that we did, three prongs to this that I think your listeners could maybe borrow from. So the first thing, like you mentioned, we did test the beta version out. So we've been using chapters as they become finalized in our coursework. And one thing that I've done, and I believe Greg did this as well, is I offered extra credit to students to critique it and just kind of tear into it. What worked, what didn't work, what examples were stupid. Fortunately, they caught a lot of like pop culture stuff that we thought was cool that was not, because we're a lot older than they are. And, so that was kind of sad, but also very helpful. So we're able to work in things that kind of resonate with them. A second thing that I did was take advantage of a course that we offer where we have undergraduate teaching apprentices who help kind of teach courses. So these are undergraduate teaching assistants, and their assignments over the various semesters were to kind of go through and really, really dig in. And these students are typically, the highest performing students in our courses. And so we kind of recruit them to serve as our teaching assistants. And so they've got, a really critical eye. They're very intelligent. But what we really appreciated from them was some of the cultural things as well. So definitely taking advantage of international students' perspective and telling us what seemed very Americanized and wouldn't resonate with people outside of continental United States. So that was super helpful, something we would never have caught. And so that was helpful. And then our third approach was to rely on our colleagues that we value. So Adam Briggs, we'll give him a specific shout out. He's someone that we appreciate kind of his stance on things in the field. I knew he was teaching an intro course, so he beta tested things with his students. And so he's at Eastern Michigan University, and he was teaching an intro course similar to ours. And so he was able to pilot and give us feedback as well. He went through, provided feedback on the chapters himself, which was great to get kind of an outsider's view from just the three of us, but also his students. I mean, and they're a little bit different than KU students or Utah students. And it was great to get their feedback and incorporate it. So in a sense, we kind of crowdsourced everything to try to get kind of a real world view of what outsiders would think. And it definitely helped the book. It made it so much better.
Very cool. I'm trying to think of a couple other things here that we had on our list to chat about. Here it is. So I know we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but are there areas? I know we talked about punishment. Are there other areas that your book kind of goes into detail that maybe some other intro books either give just kind of passing notice to, or maybe skip altogether, that you guys felt it was really worthy to develop, it was worthwhile to devote the resources to going to something in more depth?
Yeah, I can start the answer to this one. Maybe others can join in with additional thoughts. Yeah, like I said before, we didn't really, or I didn't really pull any books off my shelf to see what others were covering. I just thought, what are the cool things about behavior analysis that I wanted to cover for sure. But of course, I'm familiar with some of the books that I had considered adopting in the past, and then the book that I did adopt in the past before we had enough chapters to just use this book in beta testing. And so there were some things that I viewed as strengths and weaknesses and areas that weren't really covered in other books. And so some of those would be like, we wanted to provide a more nuanced overview of group designs and single subject designs. So we do that in some of the initial chapters. And one of the things, actually one of the very first chapters that I wrote like 20 years ago, I only wrote one chapter. And I wrote it because the book that I was using just didn't really provide any good guidelines on how to conduct a visual analysis of time series data. And, I looked around and I just couldn't find anything out there about how to really do that. Maybe I didn't look hard enough, but I set out to write it. And then, boy, that chapter was beta tested so many times because students kept telling me, I still don't get it. And so, just changes were made. And there's, in our book, there's no single chapter on that. But what is in one of the chapters where we go into that is based on a lot of the feedback that I received over time of trying to provide something that students could actually follow. And as Derek said, too simplistic a coverage of punishment, not enough on choice. I do a lot of research on choice, and so we have Derek and Flo and I all have expertise in this, and so providing more there. I mentioned habit formation before. I don't know that that's in any of the books. It's a relatively recent area of research, but again, I think it's very important for behavior analysts to incorporate that into their repertoire if they haven't already. And then I guess another one that really inspired the expansion of content was really a coverage of Pavlovian learning. Generally speaking, the book that I adopted didn't even have a chapter on Pavlovian learning. And so that was another one of the chapters that I attempted to write many, many years ago. And in hindsight, when I look back on that chapter, I think, oh my goodness, that was terrible. compared to what the final product is now that we've got in this book. It really was bad. But yeah, when I just casual observations of how much we know about Pavlovian learning, it's kind of an understudied area within behavior analysis. Sometimes, I think we might think of Pavlovian learning as some kind of competing learning process that competes with operant learning, but that's really not the case. I mean, I know a lot of Pavlovian researchers in the field, and they view us as kindred people. We are people that study learning. We study learning from a very behavioral perspective, and they attempt to do so as well. And there's just been a lot of advances in Pavlovian learning in the last decade or so. And so we really try to incorporate the most important of those advances. And they're important because these are the principles that can allow an individual to really do Pavlovian learning effectively. And so we outline those principles in a very comprehensible way. And one of the reasons why behavior analysts might be interested in that is that conditioned reinforcement is really based in Pavlovian learning. And so if you understand Pavlovian learning, if you understand the principles of effective Pavlovian learning, how to really dial up a conditioned stimulus so it's really effective, then you can really dial up the efficacy of a conditioned reinforcer. And when I've talked about those principles, I just don't find them to be too widely understood. And again, next generation of behavior analysts, if they understand those principles, I think they'll be more effective. I think they'll be more effective at arranging conditioned reinforcers and positively influencing behavior.
Very cool.
I'm just going to add two additional things that we cover that I like that we have in the book. Rule governance, we include information about that. We talk about ACT and stimulus equivalence in a way that's digestible for undergraduate students.
I see. Yeah, those are two very, very popular topics in the field right now. So to have some exposure at the introductory level certainly would be helpful. Wow, this is, I just want to just kind of take a step back here and just congratulate you guys. This just sounds like an enormous undertaking, many, many years in the making, a lot of challenges to pulling this off. So just congratulations on pulling all these strands together into one coherent text. So I look forward to checking it out. So before I let you guys go here, is there anything else that you'd like to say? I guess one of the things I'd perhaps wrap the last question up into is, what advice do you have that you haven't given already? Because we've already kind of talked about these things and with some of the various questions and answers that we've had already. But is anything else kind of left on the table here about how to advise a new behavior analyst who's undertaking teaching an introductory course for the first time? So, and let's take it from the perspective of a practicing BCBA who is offered an adjunct teaching opportunity. So aside from using your book, which is perhaps advice number one, perhaps, what would be the advice you'd provide this person who's undertaking this massive responsibility?
So I'd like to jump in here in part because of my background in performance management and staff training. Just because someone knows how to perform a clinical procedure competently and expertly doesn't mean they know how to train other people how to do that. And I see higher education similarly. So, just because someone has knowledge and expertise in content that would be covered in an introductory book doesn't mean that they have the skills or expertise to teach others that content. So one of the first things I would recommend is to educate yourself on effective teaching techniques and empirically supported procedures and to adopt them into the course. I was really fortunate my graduate training program offered what was called a future professoriate program. And so our graduate training included, if you participated in that, careful mentoring and supervision around teaching. And our graduate program at KU now offers something, it's not called the same thing, but similar to our graduate students. A lot of people don't get those experiences. I can't even imagine walking into a class the first day without any of that. I remember being so scared teaching an introductory psychology class, a discussion section. And as a graduate student, and I had some training already, it's intimidating. So there's resources out there on developing syllabi, on effective teaching practices. So educating oneself on those resources and also finding a mentor, like you would if you were to branch out into any other area in behavior analysis. There's some great published resources on that. Jonathan Baker and Linda LeBlanc and some other they have some co-authors wrote a paper in behavior analysis and practice that if you wanted to expand your repertoire and break out into a different area in behavior analysis, how do you go about doing that? That could be a really great roadmap for doing the same thing if you wanted to take on an adjunct teaching position or lecturer position. If folks were to adopt our book, I would encourage them to reach out to us. That might seem intimidating if you don't know us. Like, why would I reach out to these authors? But we can be a resource. We've done that already when in talking to people about the book and sharing assignments that we've developed, or how to use Blackboard efficiently, all of those details that just make teaching hard. That would be another recommendation that I would have. And to approach it like any other behavior that you're learning. Teaching is a behavior, and you get better at it as you practice and get feedback and adapt what you're doing. So I always do mid-semester evals. I've been doing this quite a while, not as long as Greg, but I've been doing it for a while. I still do mid-semester evals so I can get input from students, and I make changes based on that. If I'm not being an effective teacher, if I'm not effectively changing something for them, then I don't need to stick to the syllabus. We could adapt the syllabus and adapt how we do things. So, approach it like any other behavior you'd want to master as a behavior analyst.
Very cool. Well, to that end, where can people find you? You don't have to give out your actual email address here on over the air, but if you guys have websites or other types of, kind of social media handles, Derek, I know you're active on Twitter and things like that. Where can people reach out if they have questions about this? And I can assure the audience, these guys won't bite. Quite the opposite. So how about we finish up with that, and then I can let you guys continue on with your day.
Yeah, you can, if you just Google my name, Gregory Madden, and Utah State University, it'll take you right to my homepage. And from there, you can get my email, and you can see some of the research that we do. In addition to writing books, I do research.
That is the understatement of the show. I could go on about that, but we'll be here all day. So
I wouldn't encourage people to Google my name because they would likely spell it wrong. It's tough to spell. So just go to performancemanagementlab.com and you can find my contact information. I don't have any fancier Twitter handle or anything cool like Derek has.
Yeah, and my Twitter handle is applied BEH econ, so for applied behavioral economics, but it's abbreviated. And I also have the my behavioral economics laboratory website, so you could just Google Derek Reed Behavioral Economics Lab, and you could find me on there. And I believe that Wiley.com has some information on our book up on its website now. So you should be able to go directly to Wiley.com, search for our names or the title of the book, An Introduction to Behavior Analysis, and you should be able to pull up some information from that.
Very cool. And I'll have all these details in the show notes, folks. So if you're driving a car, you're walking your dog, you're running on a treadmill, just keep on keeping on, and just go to the show notes for this episode over at Behavioral Observations, and I'll have it all there waiting for you. So, guys, congratulations once again. Oh, one more thing. So we're recording this right now in January. When is the book actually available? Is it available now, or will be?
The ebook will be available in about a week. So it should be available by February 1st for certain. And then the print book will be available March 1st is the last that we heard about that. So anybody considering the book for a summer term or a fall term, it will definitely be available at that time.
All right, very good. All right, this has been a really informative episode. So Greg, Flo, Derek, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.